Greetings, I'm Robert Gardner, bringing you another in a series number 3 of Screening Room programs. We're about midway through this third season of Screening Rooms, and without wanting at least to sound pretentious, I think that we're going to be exhibiting at least 2 different kinds of courage tonight. One is the station taking the material of a man named Hollis Frampton, who's on my left, to show you, and another kind, his own courage, which is the courage of a very independent filmmaker indeed, who is out on a leading edge, kind of frontier of filmmaking. Now, Hollis, we know each other well enough to know that I'm a very different kind of a filmmaker than you, and I think it's going to make, for me at least, an interesting time. You were born in 1936, somewhere around here, weren't you? Or was it...
No, I was programmed somewhere around here.
You were programmed.
I was generated in Ohio. I've always liked to believe it took place in the backseat of a 1932 Nash, one warm night. I went to school in New England, or I went to secondary school in New England at least, and then back to the Midwest for college.
You went to school at a time and with some people who became filmmakers, is that not right? It seems to me that I have that stuck away in my field notes somewhere, that Les Blanc was a
Les Blanc,
classmate.
Indeed, was classmate. I didn't know him at all well.
Well, he got the same kind of programming, at least.
The same kind of programming within limits. There was a strange bunch of people there at that time, however. Frank Stella was a classmate. Quite by chance, the sculptor Carl Andre was my roomie my first year in school.
Sounds like a fairly rich mixture of students at whatever school this was.
Whatever school it was Andover. I think at that time at least, the bunch of us were a bit too much the Latin Quarter type to really sit comfortably there. Now I think things have changed.
You couldn't escape a reasonably good education, I suppose, though, could you?
It was absolutely inescapable.
Oh. Looking over your biography, which you were kind enough to send on, it seemed to me that your life sort of has high points every 10 years. You were born in 1936, and then I'm not sure what happened in 1946. Maybe you aren't either, but something did happen in about 1956, which would be, I think, interesting to know about, for the audience at least.
Well...
Wasn't that the period you had with Pound?
That's right. That's right. In fact, something did happen in 1946. I began to acquire a fantasy life, but we won't go into that.
Well, later, maybe.
Later, maybe. Yeah. In the late 50s, or in the middle 50s, as I was 19 and 20 years old, I imagined, I think probably a lot of young people at that time, who were in college or just getting out and had a kind of diffuse interest in the arts, imagined themselves to be poets. It was a good thing to be at that time. A few years later, it was a good thing to imagine oneself to be a painter, and now I think everybody wants to be a filmmaker. But at that time, I at least imagined myself to be a poet. And indeed, I may even have written a couple of bad poems in support of that, that posture. At the same time, there were a few kind of venerable remnants of the great generation of the 80s around. James Joyce, of course, had been dead for some time, and someone like Eliot was living in some vast imperium off in London. But Pound, albeit extremely ambiguously, was not only alive, but living in the United States.
In Insane Asylum in Washington.
In St. Elizabeth's Hospital, that's right. And was, of course, still surrounded at that time with the controversies of the political straits that had first put him there at the end of the Second World War. In any case, I had my own little college radio program on which I read poetry and so forth, and had come to a kind of problem about whether Pound's cantos really could be read on the radio at all. And somewhere along the line I reflected that Pound himself was in a position to know a great deal about the radio. Most
Having
of it
worked on it in Italy.
Yes, most of it rather sad experience. And he had, of course, had a reputation for a kind of generosity and for a fluidity and volume of correspondence that stretched back over decades. And so, for some reason at that time, it seemed natural to write the man a letter and ask him what he thought. Lo and behold, he answered it. I had never intended to go beard Ezra Pound in his den. But the correspondence ripened, and it was, in any case, about time I moved to Washington for a period of about a year and a half that, for me, ended shortly before Pound's release was assured. He went back to Italy. It was for him a particularly interesting time because he was, as I first began to correspond with him, finishing a large block of cantos, the part called Section Rock Drill. There were a number of other visitors there who were interested in the work, and Pound undertook, for the benefit of several of them, not for me specifically, an extraordinary thing. That was that he read aloud, and this took months, the entirety of the cantos and annotated them as he went.
My God. Well, were you there in capacity of a listener only, or were you able to do any documentation of this performance? Of
Oh, no, it couldn't be documented in any case. I mean, I was not at that time even a still photographer.
Look, this is endlessly, to me, fascinating. We are up against a time constraint in the program, which means that if we're going to see some of your work, we've got to stop talking at a certain point. And I don't know whether you want to introduce the first piece of film, Maxwell's Demon, in any fashion whatsoever, or we should just leap into it, medias res, and see what's there and come back and perhaps mention the next film.
Well, maybe a little introduction.
Okay.
The Maxwell of Maxwell's Demon is James Clerk Maxwell, who was a great physicist of the 19th century. He was, among other things, the father of color theory, so that we owe to him color photography and color video to an extent. But his great contribution to physics was a discipline or study called thermodynamics, which simply deals with, in very general and powerful ways, with matter in various energetic states and so forth. Well, he imagined, as it were, a tiny creature, a demon, who stood at the gateway between two chambers full of gas. Now, it's easier to imagine if you imagine yourself at a gateway between two pig pens, both of which are about half full of excited pigs. And every time one runs towards the gate from one side, you let it through, but you don't let them through from the other side. The inevitable result of this, of course, is that you'll have one empty pig pen and one pig pen chock full of extremely excited pigs. Maxwell's fantasy was about molecules of gas, as it happened, but the interesting thing about the demon to me was that it was an imaginary personage that dealt only in energy, in pure energy. This is a very brief film, then, which is a kind of homage to the notion of a creature that deals in pure energy, and to Maxwell, whom I've admired.
Well, he's a very admirable character. Let's see Maxwell's Demon by Hollis Frampton.